The Cuban Missile Crisis began quietly beneath the Atlantic, as a Soviet submarine armed with nuclear-capable torpedoes pushed toward Cuba under strict radio silence. Its mission was simple: reach the island and be prepared for confrontation with the United States Navy. The crew on board didn't know that American destroyers were tracking them the entire way, or that their vessel would become one of the earliest pressure points in a standoff that threatened to end civilization. This submarine is the opening of the story, a moment where both superpowers were already positioning hardware for a conflict they claimed they were trying to avoid. At the same time, American forces surged into the Caribbean. A-4 Skyhawks flew combat-ready patrols over carriers like the USS Essex, running simulated strike routes and maintaining full alert status. These jets weren't directly tied to the missile assembly phase, but they were part of the overwhelming U.S. military buildup meant to signal that any Soviet escalation would be met instantly. For the pilots flying those missions, this wasn't training. One radar misread or one accidental weapon release could have triggered a nuclear chain reaction. The true spark came when a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft captured crystal-clear photos of medium-range ballistic missile sites under construction in Cuba. The images revealed launch pads, transporters, fuel stations, and unmistakable R-12 and R-14 missiles capable of striking Washington or New York in minutes. Until that moment, the United States suspected Cuba had defensive weapons. Now it had proof of offensive nuclear missiles 90 miles off its coast. The discovery forced the Kennedy administration into an immediate scramble to respond before the missiles became fully operational. Months earlier, President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had met and attempted to stabilize tensions. Their handshake projected diplomacy, but both leaders privately left that meeting convinced the other viewed negotiation as weakness. Khrushchev believed placing missiles in Cuba would balance American missiles in Turkey and Italy. Kennedy believed firm diplomacy, backed by force, could contain Soviet expansion. Their personal rivalry and mutual misreadings formed the foundation for the crisis. Two leaders trying to project strength while avoiding outright war. The U-2 remained the center of the story. It had discovered the missiles, but every new flight risked triggering war. These aircraft flew high, slow, and unarmed, making them vulnerable if detected. Soviet surface-to-air missile sites in Cuba repeatedly locked onto them, and eventually, one U-2, flown by Major Rudolph Anderson, was shot down by an SA-2 missile. Every flight carried the possibility of forcing Kennedy's hand into a military response. Anderson's missions, especially his final one, were essentially intelligence operations carried out under the shadow of potential nuclear retaliation. Inside the White House, Kennedy convened the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, ExComm. Their debates were intense and often divided. Some argued for immediate airstrikes to destroy the missile sites before they could be launched. Others warned that attacking Soviet forces in Cuba without warning might provoke a response somewhere else, especially Berlin. Kennedy forced the committee to outline every scenario: invasion, blockade, diplomacy, or combined strategies. These discussions shaped the entire U.S. response and became the most consequential internal policy debates of the Cold War. Rudolph Anderson's final flight became the breaking point. His U-2 was the only American aircraft shot down during the crisis, and his death created extreme pressure on Kennedy to retaliate. The U.S. military wanted immediate strikes on the SAM site responsible. Kennedy refused. He understood a retaliatory strike could easily trigger a Soviet counterstrike in Europe, escalating the crisis beyond control. Anderson's death pushed tensions to their highest level and demonstrated how one event, even an unintended one, could bring the world to the brink of nuclear war. Behind the scenes, a lesser-known committee assessed the legality and morality of U.S. options. They analyzed whether a preemptive attack on Cuban missile sites could be considered an act of aggression under international law and whether such a strike could qualify as a war crime. Their role wasn't to dictate strategy, but to outline the consequences of every military option. Their analysis reminded Kennedy of the stakes. Once the first American bomb fell on Cuba, the Soviets would respond, and escalation to nuclear warfare would be almost impossible to stop. The crisis finally ended through a mixture of diplomacy and calculated restraint. The United States agreed not to invade Cuba and quietly removed missiles from Turkey, while the Soviet Union dismantled its missile sites in Cuba. Decades later, modern leaders frequently reference the Cuban Missile Crisis, sometimes even drawing comparisons to the Bay of Pigs, to frame their own national security decisions. These references highlight why the crisis remains a blueprint for managing nuclear confrontation. The world avoided annihilation because both Kennedy and Khrushchev understood the cost of pride. The Cuban Missile Crisis stands as the clearest reminder that in nuclear standoffs, caution, communication, and restraint are the only real safeguards against global catastrophe. Thank you all for watching my newest YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed my content, and I will see you all in my next video.